Right, so you're obviously getting budget 2024 reactions from our reporters. They're just outside the Cape Town City Hall. We know that the Finance Minister, Enoch, Kongana, of course, delivered that budget. Some mixed reactions coming through from political parties who have criticized some of the measures that have been taken in just regards to structural reforms, the agenda on that front, SOEs, especially looking at mitigating against some of the issues like electricity, like water, telecommunications and visa, questioning the use of our reserve fund as well, concerns on that front. And also just looking at whether this is going to be inspiring investor confidence, also looking at what ratings agencies are going to be looking for. Whether he touched on some of those low-hanging fruits as well. So, as I mentioned, our reporters are stationed outside the Cape Town City Hall, and Bulelani Philip just spoke. Let me hand over to Tsepo Mongai. He is going to be also getting more reactions. It's over to you, Tsepo.
Right, thank you very much. Finance Minister Enoch announced the introduction of public procurement bill, and this will actually help many small businesses who wants to access opportunities in government. But of course, there's still a lot of going to be public consultation around this bill. A lot can change in terms of the form and the some of the visions that this bill espoused to achieve. For more, we're now joined by the Black Business Council CEO, Kongana. Just your reaction in terms of this speech. Are you welcoming the public procurement bill?
Thank you very much, Tsepo and the viewers. Thank you very much for having us. We welcome certain components of the speech. Firstly, we welcome the public procurement bill. It has gone through the National Assembly, and now it's left with one leg, which is the National Council of Provinces. And then from there, it goes to the president to sign. And we welcome it. If it goes in the current form, we think it will bring a lot of change and difference in small businesses, black businesses, women-owned businesses, because it's got a component that is called set-asides. So government and state-owned enterprises will be able to set aside a certain amount of procurement for small business, for people living with disabilities, for young people, for people who were marginalized in the past. So we hope the president will sign it before the end of the parliamentary process now, because if it doesn't get signed, then it means it's going to go into the next part. We also welcome the support for black farmers. It's important that we level the playing field created by apartheid. We support initial funding for national health insurance, but we will need more details as to the sustainability of the funding going forward. But in our view also, the budget lacks plans on industrialization, localization, so that we can create jobs here in South Africa. It also lacks plan on supporting small business, funding black business, funding youth-owned businesses. Because if you start with a problem statement to say our problem is the lack of growth of the economy, our second problem is the unemployment that we have. State SA just released the numbers yesterday. We are up there with the West as far as unemployment is concerned. So we're supposed to then say, if we want to create so many jobs, we want to reduce unemployment by so much in the next 5 years, in the next 30 years, because now we're celebrating the 30 years of democracy. We're supposed to then say, how do we do that? And our view is that we can only do that by funding small business, because they've got the capability to employ more people. Those people will pay tax. The small business themselves will pay tax, and that will create consumption in the economy, and that will then grow the economy.
Thank you very much. That's Kongana. He's the CEO of Black Business Council. I now hand you over to Bulelani, my colleague.
Thank you so much, Tsepo. Of course, we are doing more political reactions here in the precinct of the Cape Town City Hall. Joining me now is Mansour Sheikh Imam from the NFP. You've always been talking about the issue of the social security net. Did the minister really go far enough?
Not at all. I must be honest, not impressive at all. You know, Minister talks about appropriating a lot more funding on the police sector or the safety and security cluster, but not addressing the root causes of the high levels of crime. If you don't deal with the socio-economic conditions, then you're going to recruit more and more police officers. You're going to go and buy, and like he says, some of the funds that's coming from the asset forfeiture unit is going to be used to buying more vehicles and things. This is what is going to happen all the time unless you deal with the root causes of the high levels of crime, the high levels of unemployment, the socio-economic condition under which people are living, the availability of alcohol and drugs in the township, taverns being open 24 hours a day. These are some of the things. Teenage pregnancy, 91,000 children giving birth to children, you know. So these are some of the things that he should be touching on, but he's not touching on it. And I don't know why we believe, and I believe it's not sustainable to continuously talk about rolling out more and more social grants rather than making people productive, giving them the dignity back, you know, so that they can earn a living and get back their dignity. But it's not happening. You know, the minister talks about infrastructure, 948 or so billion rand he wants to set aside. But he knows very well we don't have the capacity to be able to implement this. And more importantly, he knows and understands, and the former CEO of supply chain raised this before he left. 40% on goods and services is lost in this country because you don't get value for money. Now, can you imagine you setting aside 900 and somewhat billion rand and 40% of that is going because you're not getting value for money? Now, the new the procurement bill will go a long way in dealing with it. But have we put sufficient measures in place to stop it? Certainly not. Minister is admitting that we're not even, you know, paying market-related prices for the goods you're buying for the state, and it should have been cheaper because we're buying in bulk. It's not the case because people, this is a milking cow and they're milking the snake. Put measures in place to try and close those gaps. And I can tell you what is frightening for me is now we're even going to touch on those gold reserves that, you know, 150 billion rand he might be taking away from them. He doesn't talk about, you know, stopping the borrowing of money. He wants to reduce it, but still borrow 20 cents on every rand being paid to our debt service cost. Where are we heading?
All right, thank you so much, Mansour Sheikh Imam from the NFP. For more reaction now, I cross back to my colleague Tsepo.
Right, so there, of course, was our reporter Bulelani Philip, stationed outside the City Hall in Cape Town. We're getting reactions from our other reporters, including Nompumelelo Siziba and Tsepo Mongai. They're just speaking to some of the political parties after the Finance Minister, Enoch delivered his budget speech for 2024. As I alluded to earlier on, we also know there have been some mixed reactions. In fact, let's continue with those reactions. Tsepo Mongai is standing by with some more of those.
Thank you very much. I must say that the budget speech came as a surprise for many economists. They were expecting numbers that were worse than what came out during the medium-term budget policy statement. But for some reasons, there was a lot of improvement on various fronts. The budget deficit is still maintained below 5%. And of course, they've also trying to make sure that they contained expenditure. Revenue also, compared to the medium-term budget policy statement, not a massive increase. So there are some few surprises that economists are actually trying to look into with regard to this budget speech. I'm now joined by Nedbank's economist, Isaac Matiego, just to take us through some of these surprises that you've seen in the budget review.
Well, I'll say it was a good balancing act, a lot of pleasant surprises, the commitment to keep expenditure growth under control, and of course the faster than initially expected increase in tax revenue will help to reduce the budget fall to below 4% by 2026-2027.
What surprised me is the cost containment measures. They say that they are going to reverse some of those cost-cutting measures that were announced in the medium-term budget policy statement.
Yeah, a big focus on the public sector wage bill, but of course, additional allocations for essential services. We're talking in the health sector, the security services, and also education. But other personnel costs will be controlled very strictly. And I believe it's the right thing to do, saying that, where we're coming from. Before COVID, there were very high increases, and it's about time to contain that expenditure burden.
Is this approach sustainable, given that they had to use the foreign contingency reserves in order to reduce our debt to GDP?
Well, we're going to have to implement the hard measures to ensure that the increase of the debt stock is kept under control. Over the next 3 years, we're tapping about 150 billion out of the contingency reserve account. We have benefited from the increase, for instance, in the gold price and also the weakness of the rand. That is filling a very important gap. But in the long term, we really have to do the serious things, implement serious measures to ensure that we expand the economy in that way, expand the tax base, and keep the debt stock under control.
If you look at various categories of taxes, also it gives an overall picture that things are still looking very bad, and there are still a lot of challenges in terms of improving the tax collection.
Sure, but what's encouraging is the faster increase in personal taxes. I mean, we've seen, for instance, the financial services sector paying a bit more, but the bloodbath in the mining sector and the manufacturing sector, I must add, is really concerning.
That's Nedbank's Isaac Mathiho about some of his reaction to the 2024 budget. I'll now hand you over to Bulelani Philip, my colleague.
Thanks again, Tsepo. Of course, the minister had a lot of tough juggling acts to do in relation to the allocations. Joining me now is Dr. Joe Phaahla, the Minister of Health. Dr. Joe Phaahla, thank you so much for your time. The allocations for health, will they ensure that hospitals and clinics have supplies? We have enough nurses, junior doctors are paid or employed?
Well, we are very grateful for the efforts the Minister has made to help us in the health sector. As the Minister has indicated, there will be growth in terms of the overall budget over the next 3 financial years. Just in terms of the specific areas which he has highlighted, in the area of assisting us to pay salaries, as we know that the reason why we have a number of junior doctors who have not been able to be given a post. There's a 11.6 billion rand over the next 3 years, starting in the current the 2024 financial year from 1st of April, an amount of 3.7 billion rand which will be allocated in addition to what was already allocated. That will help us not only address the issue of doctors, but in terms of also making sure that other staff like nurses, pharmacists, physiotherapists, and the whole comprehensive team, we can be able to add more. So that takes us somewhere. He also mentioned 27 billion over the 3 years on infrastructure. That also takes us a long way. Also in the area of health information systems, digital health systems. So all those areas do help us to improve the quality of our health services. Of course, health is always a huge demand. So we can never say it's enough, because this is closing the gap on many years of a chronic underfunding. But we are very grateful that we are not going in reverse, we are going some steps forward.
Now, the National Health Insurance Scheme, which is probably a controversial scheme from other quarters, Do you think the government will be able to afford it? Let's put aside the issues of the constitutionality of how it was adopted. Do you think the government can be able to afford it?
Well, we've always been saying that this is a question of reforming. As South Africa, as a country, we're already far above many countries in terms of spending. In terms of as a percentage of GDP, we have said we are at about 8.5% of GDP spending. It's just that it's fragmented. So I hear a number of media, some analysts talking about a 20% increase in tax. I don't know where they get that, because what we're talking about, it's a reform of how those of us who have income are already spending over and above what we spend in terms of taxes to the SARS. We pay taxes also in terms of we've got a parliamentary medical scheme.
So in short, you dispute that it will lead to higher increases in tax?
All that it will actually reduce for the spending of those who have income, who are already spending a lot more beyond just what we pay in general taxes. The specific contribution towards a national health insurance fund will be far lower than what those who have income are already spending. So that's what we can assure, especially those who have income, and therefore and we can look at, South Africa is not we are not an island. These are practices which are already happening, in many countries all over the world, where over and above your general tax, there is a specific contribution which you make towards a protected fund, which looks after your health services.
Thank you so much, Minister. Dr. Joe Patra is the Minister of Health. And for more reaction, we cross back to Tsepo.
Thank you very much, Bulelani. For more reaction, we are now joined by the chair of Shell Downstream, Arwani Museisi. Just to get a sense of the petroleum and energy industry, what is your reaction, overall impression from the minister's speech?
No, thank you, Sepo, for having me. Overall impression is that the speech was very balanced. The minister had to make very tough choices across the board, but I think I would say it's very neutral in terms of the petroleum side of the industry. And I say it's neutral given that there's no new initiatives around, for instance, recovery mechanism for clean fuels or infrastructure investment around gas moving forward, and given the importance of gas in the energy transition.
I mean, we are told that as a country, for example, we may run out of LP gas, for example, following the decision by Sasol. So I would assume there's a lot of focus on that in terms of the plan to come up with new gas.
Obviously, you're right. There's a discussion on, the so-called gas cliff that comes in 2027, and definitely it is important. Gas plays an important role and can continue to play an important role, especially when you start to look at renewables and the future, given that gas emit 30% less than coal today, and therefore you can be able to build on gas as a resource for the future. And most importantly, on the other side, we do need to have newer reforms that can crowd in new investment into exploration of gas in our shores.
Thank you very much. That's Arwani Museisi. He's the chair of Shell Downstream. And now hand you over to Bulelani Phillips.
Thank you so much, Tsepo. Again, the man of the moment, Finance Minister Enoch Kongana, now joining me to talk more about his budget speech. Minister, thank you so much for making time. I know you have to go back into the House shortly. Firstly, coming into this budget and also post-budget, the opposition parties are criticizing you to say that this is the same old, but we'll see very little deliverables on the ground. Your reaction to that?
Of course. I wouldn't expect opposition to say, oh, this is a good budget, particularly in the context when we are going to an election. So there's nothing I can say to simply statements like that, unless they were pointing out a particular aspect of the budget.
And also there's criticism again for the National Treasury to tap into the reserves, saying that that's a dangerous game. How did you come to that decision?
No, where they are making a mistake is in ignorance of the fact that that account, when it is negative, National Treasury puts money into it. In 2003, it was negative. We had to put money into it. So when it is positive, National Treasury can access the positive part of it. It's in the Act.
And this budget, would you say that it will bring a better life for Dinswalo as espoused by President Cyril Ramaphosa?
Surely, what it does, if you look at the areas of focus, is in education, health services, and so on, and the employment of doctors, teachers, and so on. So, and also to advance the education system, we're putting a lot of money on the education side.
Social services, people are saying that at least the social grants should have been increased closer to the poverty line. Couldn't you have maneuvered towards that?
Look, there's a difference between your wish and your ability to do that. People who are saying it should have been approached, they must ask the question, are they prepared to pay more taxes? For me to raise this thing, if people are prepared to pay more taxes, I can raise it to whatever level.
But the question or the debate is that there's leakages in government which could be used to actually fund these social services.
It's all very well for somebody to say there are leakages. Everybody makes that bold statement. It would be useful for somebody to say there's a leakage of X amount from which department, so that I should be able to respond, not to generalization. I'm quite interested to know where the leakages are. I would like to close them.
Take us through the tax increases. How did you arrive at that?
The tax increases is just, I didn't give anybody any tax relief this year, whether it's on credit card, on medical aids or anything else. We didn't do that. We also raised a number of sin taxes to increase that. And we also raised a bit of company tax for those companies that have offshore outfits that are paying lesser tax than South Africa. We're compensating for that.
The debt service costs, it's quite a big issue in the government budget. When are we going to reach the curve when it starts going down?
You will see, we're saying in 2026, 25, 26, we're reaching the peak. After that, it begins to go down. But there's no government in the world that does not have debt, because always the government has got a deficit when they present a deficit. But the key question is, it a manageable level?
And just lastly, I've just spoken to the health minister here. The National Health Insurance Scheme is billed as one of the major, achievements of this democratic government. As National Treasury, have you been able to project how much it's going to cost and its impact in terms of the taxes?
We've not done that because it's not been assented yet by the president. As soon as the president does that, we'll then sit down with the Department of Health and say, how do we progressively realize objectives of this? It's not going to be all of a sudden implemented tomorrow.
All right, thank you so much, Minister Enoch Kongana, the Finance Minister. All the best in the implementation of the national budget. Of course, he's just delivered the budget speech for this year. And just a reminder to our viewers at home is that just inside here, the House, the National Assembly is considering a recommendation for the removal of 2 judges for gross misconduct. That is suspended Western Cape High Court Judge President John Klope, as well as retired Judge Ngola Mutata. So the parties will be voting in favor or against the removal of those 2 judges. We'll wait in anticipation to see the outcome later on in the afternoon.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for tuning in. Of course, our reporters bring us the latest, some of the reactions following Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's budget speech for 2024 delivery. Of course, we'll continue to monitor developments from here into really unpacking what was communicated and really what this means for South Africa, particularly in this election year.